Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Anthony Hennon. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania editor, Kristen Smith. Kristen, once again, we are talking elections and election reforms, and this probably will not be the last time we talk about this on the podcast. But we're seeing some new proposals of how to reform the system, how to make it better, what's happening, and do we have much of a shot of changing anything before November hits?
So for the last 4.5 years, ever since the state enacted widespread mail-in voting, lawmakers have been complaining that the law needs tightened up, that there's some unintended consequences that are just running amok now 4.5 years later. And it's a conversation that they have all the time. There's bills that have been presented and have failed. Some getting pretty close to the finish line, but have never panned out. This year, it looks like we're kind of headed in the same direction. House Speaker Joanna McClinton, she's a Democrat from Philadelphia. She wants the state to open up in-person voting to 2 weeks before Election Day. And she also wants same-day voter registration. This is something that the Democratic Party has been really asking for many years, both nationally and at the state level. They say that particularly the in-person voting component of their proposal is that, their seniors, disabled residents, shift workers, other people who are going to have a really hard time managing getting to the polls in that short time frame. And so opening it up for them offers them an opportunity to vote, because these are sometimes people who are also wary of mail-in ballots. They're quick to point out that, it's not a partisan issue as far as voting in person versus voting on a mail-in ballot. Sometimes mail-in is truly the only option people have if they want to vote, and those who don't trust it, they're not necessarily going to get to the poll on Election Day. So this is their mindset going into this. On the flip side, you have Senate Republicans who have been, for a long time, pretty upset about what they see as flaws in our voting machines and concerns about whether the state went too far when it expanded voting access back in 2019, because you got to remember, this was a couple months before the pandemic, so it really rolled out in the 2020 election season. I mean, people couldn't leave their houses, let alone leave, they couldn't do anything because we were at the height of the pandemic. And so mail-in voting was really all there was. We had ballot boxes. We had all kinds of new ways to vote that weren't an option in Pennsylvania before. And that moved a little too quickly for a lot of Republicans. And now that they want to tighten up some of those measures, ballot boxes in particular, something that really, upset them. They think that they're prone to ballot stuffing, which is when one person submits ballots for a bunch of other people other than themselves. There was some few minor documented cases of this, nothing that rises to the level of thousands of ballots being cast for the wrong person or on behalf of dead people, nothing like that. They also want to make sure that that ballots are more standardized, so that they can be more secure. There's less of a risk for them being filled out inappropriately. Some of the components that they were talking about adding are like QR codes and other security measures that other states have adopted. So you can see here, they're on two different ends of the spectrum here about how to make elections better. Quite honestly, it's not something that's surprising where they're at. And if there is a consensus ever to be found, I mean, we'll find out. Budget's coming. There's little historical appetite for making big sweeping changes this close to a presidential election. So even if they had come up with some sort of deal between these two different, camps, we likely wouldn't see it in time for November.
Yeah, it seems like Pennsylvania tends to run behind a lot of other states in trying new things or pushing a reform. But we've also seen, especially with voting, until a big crack up happens, you don't get a lot of dramatic changes. Florida, seemingly the most famous example of that in 2000. Now they have early voting. They do a lot of mail-in voting. But it seems like, too, in Pennsylvania, the Republicans seemed like they were a little open to some reforms, but on the basis of getting voter ID through as a constitutional amendment. Is that still kind of floating around in a concern? Do you think will be, does there seem like there's a lot of potential compromise here? Or is this another edition of the great electoral debate in the state?
Voter ID, universal voter ID, it's a non-starter for Democrats that is unlikely to change anytime soon. Where there could be some agreement would be pre-canvassing rules, which is not actual ballot counting, but basically preparing the ballots to be counted. So checking the signatures and setting them up. Apparently that takes a lot longer than the actual counting. And anyone who's voted in Pennsylvania in the last 4.5 years know that we rarely have results on election night unless it's a blowout or it's something really obvious. It can take days to get certified results. That's something that the state wants to fix. Part of the reason there is that we are losing county election administrators left and right. And when that happens, there is more potential for human error because you have less people to handle more votes and to do more work. And it's not always as straightforward as, oh, here's this ballot. This is who this person voted for. The end. There's a lot of room for error to happen. And that's where we've seen some of these disputes come up about, oh, these ballots shouldn't have been counted because the signatures didn't match, or there wasn't a signature, or they were missing a specific part of the envelope. Lawmakers really want to be able to find a way to fix those more detail-oriented issues as far as voting goes. And it's an interesting place that the state stands in the middle of the administration because their focus seems to be primarily on these county issues, recruiting poll workers. They do agree that they want to make ballots more simplified and standardized so that we don't have as much, it doesn't rely as much on human eyesight and other ways that humans could mess up the counting of these ballots. So they are a lot more in the middle as far as what needs to be done. Another thing that the state has started to do is when they are hiring more election administrators, they're setting up a team that goes out to train. And they give them checklists and all these instructions so that they know exactly what needs to be done so that there's not so much confusion, pandemonium, and delay on election night.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Are you tired of news that puts politics over people? At the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation, we believe in putting people over politics by delivering nonpartisan news and audio content that serves you, the American taxpayer. With Franklin News Foundation, you can read fact-based, state-focused news for free at thecentersquare.com. You can listen to civil, balanced conversations between policy experts through our podcast network at americastalking.com. Or you can get in-depth news on K-12 education spending, curriculum, and school safety at chalkboardnews.com. It's all free through Franklin, where we put you, the American taxpayer, first in every story, episode, and conversation. And it's only possible through our supporters. Together, we can produce content that puts people over politics and brings Americans the news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate. Once again, that's franklinnews.org/donate.